Yes, I love that music. I love the music. Hello, Malhar, and how are you? You're on mute.
Well, you love the music. I love the fact that you love the music because I needed you to love anything today. So, Ashok, good evening. How are you?
I am not too bad. Not too bad. Okay, lively and happy. I'm very excited to meet our guest. How are
I
you,
know.
Malhar?
I know you've been singing praises of her. I am good now. I was in a bit of a rush, and I'm glad I'm seated and looking presentable for our dear Anne and to welcome her. So let's quickly welcome Anne's
Okay,
introduction.
let me introduce who
Mm.
to all our guests who have logged in or watching the show right now. Welcome to Leadership in Flow Asia. We are very happy to have you around because today we have Anne Schot to be sharing with us about her transitional journey. Now, what is interesting about Anne is she was born in Netherlands, Holland, right? And then she moved to Asia, right? In Vietnam, in Hong Kong, and in Singapore. And she's also lived in Shanghai and Delhi, right? She is currently in Koh Samui as we are doing this show, right, in Thailand. Now, apart from that, she started off as a lawyer, right, in Netherlands, and then she became a strategic consultant in Asia, and now she's an entrepreneur. And she'll tell you more about it in our show. Let's bring her on.
Okay. Yeah, we should bring her on very, very quickly because I'm sure she's got
Yes.
a lot
And
to
Subramaniam
share.
Iyer, how are you? He says, hi, Malar. I'll reply for Malar at the moment. Hello, Subramaniam Iyer. We are very happy to have you in the show. And let's have Anne. Hello, Anne.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay. You're looking very bright and chirping in Koh Samui. I love the color blue at the back. Is that your favorite color?
It is, it's absolutely my favorite color. So I have blue behind me and I have blue in front of me as well in the shape of an ocean.
Oh, wow. Aren't we jealous, Malar?
Yes, indeed we are. And she looks so serene, right?
Exactly, right?
And it makes a lot of sense that why she is so good with transitional journeys.
Okay. And the blue is a good color for
Thank you.
transition.
Yeah, she's so zen about it, about transitions, right? So yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's
Right.
lovely.
Thank you very much. And okay, so let me just kick off. Right. Let me just kick off. I know I was sharing with our guests here that you finished off your, I wouldn't say finished off your career, but in your last place of work with Ernst and Young, you were a global strategic operations leader for the oil and gas sector. But let's go back to where it all started, right? When you first became or decided to choose the profession of being a lawyer, right? A practicing lawyer in that sense. So share with us, what was your interest or passion for law that got you involved with that?
Right. Well, it wasn't love at first sight, that's for sure.
Law, love at first sight. Okay, all right.
But it's actually quite ironic, right? Because at the age of 5, I knew exactly what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a captain on one of these large merchant navy vessels to see the world. Because inspired by my brother, he was on one of these big vessels, and that's what I want to do. I wasn't even able to go to the Maritime Academy at that stage because they didn't allow girls to come. Didn't bother me. I knew exactly what to do when I was 5. But then you turn 18 and you have no clue. It's like, what do I do? Do I become a fashion designer because I love to design fashion? I love to write. Do I become a journalist? And I opted to study law.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is, and you will see quite a few people who are in business, they did a law degree simply because it's giving you a really broad base in terms of knowledge. So it's not just the legal aspect they're teaching you. It was economics, it was sociology. I worked with a judge in a children's court. I worked with a children's psychiatrist. So it's really giving you this super broad base. And eventually, I really started to enjoy it because it develops your critical thinking.
Okay.
You don't assume anything. You just ask question after question. And for me, it really helped to develop my critical thinking, to be much more analytical, don't
Okay.
assume anything. And what it also really helped me do is to articulate very clearly. Because it's like, look at bad legislation, like, for example, the most recent legislation in Hong Kong, which is so unclearly worded that it's getting people concerned.
Mm-hmm.
If you have really clear legislation, contracts, you know exactly where you are and where you stand. So that really helped me. And you think in scenarios, it's like, what if this happened? What would be the impact? How likely is it to happen? So it's a way of thinking that I've always adopted in every job that I did. And it is something that is really, it's touching all our lives, right? So we live in a world full of legislation, and it's basically all around us. So, and I made a deliberate choice to go to the university in Rotterdam, Erasmus University, because it wasn't that legalistic. It had a lot of, it used to be an economic high school before it became a university, and did all sorts of other studies as well. And the interesting thing is that our criminal law professor, he was actually not in favor of prisons at all. So rather than teaching us what was in the criminal law, it's like, you can find that in the textbook. And he was much more around the injustice of prisons and everything. So that was quite a unique position at that stage in the Netherlands. So yeah, that's how over time law became a passion, and I decided to continue with law and work as a lawyer. But I was very clear that I didn't want to be in a law firm and go to court, because we know all that if you go to court, there's problems, there's conflicts, and I didn't want that. So I was looking really for a job with a corporate where I could help build rather than fight.
Wow. You know, it's very interesting. And for the first thing, I must tell you, the way you paint your journey of studying law, you made it sound so sexy. I wanted to study law also. Because I don't think a lawyer has ever told me all of that. I was like, really? Wow, you just made it seem like, did I waste my life? But you're right to say we live in a legislative world, and law impacts everything else also. I mean, there's a lot of, it's not just about understanding the legalities, technicalities of the law, but how it impacts economics, society, so on and so forth. And I like the fact that you said there were a lot of things you learned, and a few things I get is critical thinking, the way it helps you analyze clearly, and the most important, articulate clearly. And I like the fact that you said you studied law, yes, but you didn't want to waste your energy in fighting, but you rather focus on building. Wow. And you know what? Mullet is already itching to ask you a question, or should I go next, Mullet? or I will go. Okay, so Mallory, what she's doing now is creating a whole arsenal of questions ready for you. Okay, so that was nice. I like that journey that you've gone to the legal side, and I'm sure within your legal experience, you would have picked up a lot of different type of experiences, good or bad or whatever we call it. All right,
Mm.
and and from there you transited to become a strategic consultant, right? So what lessons did you draw, right, from your legal practice that helped you transit to become a strategic consultant and do it well?
Thank you. Um, that was a journey, and it wasn't that one day it was a legal practice and the next day it was a strategic consultancy. It sort of over time became a strategic consultancy, also because driven by the fact that the business environment in Vietnam was very different than just practicing law. But it's so after graduating, I was fortunate enough to start with a software company that was really successful, mid 80s, growing like crazy. And the two founders were interested in growing the company and listing it. So they wanted to do an IPO at a stock exchange in Amsterdam. So even though they hired me as a lawyer, I learned a lot of other things in the meantime as well. In my first couple of months in the company, I spent together with a McKinsey team who were hired to look at, is this company really IPO ready? Do we need to change the structure? Does it work? So they basically said, why don't you work along with them? You will get to know the company. And it was an amazing learning experience. And just imagine you're a fresh graduate.
Yep.
And I felt like I'm starting all over again, because even though you did your study, it's like when you get into practice, you're on a new journey. And basically it's just like driving a car, right? You can't drive a car only because you know the traffic rules. So this was an amazing learning experience. I then was completely involved in the listing itself, and the lessons that I learned from the two leaders, like, yes, you're a lawyer, but it's always coming second or third to the commercial aspects. So commercial aspects are always number one. And if it's legally not possible, then we will review. But otherwise, just know that this is the way we operate. And that has learned me so much, because, and I've been fighting with teams later on when I wasn't a lawyer anymore. And it's like, don't be so rigid. It's like, think about the opportunities that we have here, and don't say terms and conditions can't be changed. Think of the opportunities that we have and of the risks that we have. So really early on, it shaped me to think commercial before just legal. And it's also be creative. When there is a problem, think of a solution. Never just say there is a problem. It's like, see what the possibilities are for solutions, and be creative. Is the company that I worked for was such a size that it was mandatory to have an employees council, and we didn't have one. And during the period that I was working for the company, we didn't have an employees council because no one wanted to be part of that. And we had, and this was really early on and very creative of the management team, to have an employee share fund. So everyone could buy shares in the company, kept them super motivated. And so it's a creative way of binding people to the company without giving them ever the feel that they wouldn't be hurt. So that is what I learned when I was still an employee. Then when I decided to set up my own practice, you realize, and I had seen so many business plans by then, so you know you can do it. But when you are selling a service, it's like you need to be really outcome oriented. It's like, why would someone come to you? So what I learned is you have to be you have to develop certain services that are almost tangible. So what I did while I was still in the legal practice, I developed something that was called a legal scan. And it's like you do an audit, you review contracts, and so it's much more tangible for clients because they get a report and an outcome. So that is definitely something that I learned. The other thing is be known, and that is how I decided to. Well, it was intended to be a thin book, but it ended up to be a 500+ page book on the legal aspects of foreign investment in Vietnam. And so that puts you out in the market. So be known for what you do. So that are some of the things that I took from legal practice to my consultancy. And the other thing is be bold. Because when I started my own company, we positioned it as a legal advisory. And as such, we were in direct competition with some of the law firms who, of course, in addition to going to court, they advise a lot of private clients as well. So the Law Society tried to stop us. At that time, I think it was still the Big Eight, what is now Big Four, but Deloitte and everything of the world. They were starting their legal practices as well. So us tiny company, 2 people, together with these big giants, we set up an organization and say, like, we are an association of private lawyers, business-oriented lawyers. We have all the rights and freedom to advise. So,
Sure.
I mean, so it's like be bold and yeah. So
Yeah. Okay, so let me get this right. So you started off in Netherlands with a software company,
yep.
and then when you transited to Asia, it was in Vietnam first.
It was Vietnam first. Yes, I started to. Well, my very first travel to Vietnam was 91, which was early on. It was just opening up, and then in 90, you saw companies like after everyone had started in China to take the opportunities to work in Vietnam. There were, I mean, there was 80 million people around that time. So opportunities. So companies were starting to look at how can we do business in Vietnam. And so for me, that was indeed an opportunity to say, what can we do? How can we help these companies? And so I started to research the book for the book in 93.
Right.
And because Vietnam was developing its legislation for foreign investment, they changed it. So I had to change the book. And so it took me a while to basically write it. But it was published in 96. And that is also when I moved to Vietnam with 2 suitcases.
Suitcases full of your books.
Some of them, yes.
One of them. Okay. So so some of the lessons I'm hearing is, yes, you needed to be bold to take that step from Netherlands to Vietnam itself. Being known, I think that's a very good advice. Show your expertise. That's where, in the form of a book, it came out, right? And I like the fact that you are very pro-business, and that's what some of the lessons you learn. Don't let the legal aspects or the compliance aspects get in the way, but be very more outcome focused, tangible outcomes. And these were some of the lessons that you have learned while you're transiting from a lawyer who didn't want to fight but wanted to build, right? And through the software platform, you learned about being pro-business in many, many ways, right? Fantastic lessons that you picked up. Now, I'm sure there were leadership skills that you needed to pick up along the way. personal leadership and leadership of even dealing with a team. Let's talk about personal leadership, or what are some of the leadership skills that you needed to learn about yourself as you took on this journey, moving to Vietnam, because you're transiting from a known environment to a totally unknown environment. How did you feel, because you're probably feeling lost, what, I'm not too sure. Tell us about your leadership journey there.
Well, definitely you have to really understand yourself. It's like that self-awareness is so super important. It's like who am I, and how do people see me? And so that what motivates you really. So a couple of things that clearly moving to Asia, the whole cultural awareness was so very different than what I had been used to so far, working in Western Europe, working in the US. So that was learning about the different cultures in Asia, how to deal with them, are massively important. And I've been teaching people afterwards, is like on cultural journeys, how important it is that you respect people for that. And so while I think when I was still in the Netherlands, that I was pretty judgmental very quickly. That is something you have to learn to completely forget. So one of the things that I've learned is to be a very intent listener. Is like, what is it that clients really, really want? And I used to have this cartoon on the wall where your picture number one was, this is what the client asked for. And then it's like, this is what I'm hearing. This is what was designed. And this was what delivered to the client. And you go from a sofa to a car seat. So it's basically those differences. So it's like really learning to, what is it that people want? Put yourself in the shoes of your clients, understand what they want, what is driving them. So that is something that I really had to learn. This is saying this, you think, oh yeah, I understand what it is. So that was very, very different as a business, and definitely when your team is growing, is prioritize. It's because I have this personal mentality to, oh yeah, this sounds interesting. Oh, let's do that. Oh yeah, we can do that too. It's like, it doesn't work. You only have 24 hours in a day, so you really need to prioritize. So that is something that I learned along the way as well. Is be clear. This is where we are. I'm a very impatient person. So sometimes when you, and it's not a good skill to have in Asia. So that is something that I learned over time as well. But as before, because sometimes I was like, oh, I can do this faster myself than to explain to someone what to do. But that's clearly not a good leadership skill to have. So I forced myself to delegate, to trust people and to delegate, and to have an open door policy that whenever you need something, come. But that is really something that helped me along the way to get more done to start with, because people pick up skills and they run projects themselves. So that is really something that I would encourage everyone to, if you don't delegate, do it, because you will be able to achieve just a lot more. And one of the things that, and I heard someone say that, is like, you lead from the front and from the back. You're not just up front. You, of course, you have to walk the talk. You have to lead by example, but at the same time, you also sweep up the team and make sure that no one is left behind, and you help people to sort of navigate. And so I just really like that phrase, lead from the front and from the back. So that there's something that you do over time as well. So importance of EQ. It's like that's immense. It's like to be not just listen to clients, but also listen to your team members and what is keeping them busy. So it all sounds like, oh yeah, these are our leadership lessons, but putting them into practice is something really different. And as I said, I'm naturally impatient, so it's like, okay, let's come to the point. No, let's take time, step back, reflect. So I think those are some of the things. What I also and that was a really valuable experience in Vietnam. So I had been exposed to business in Europe and in the US. I had never really had exposure to NGOs. And in Vietnam, I had the opportunity to work with an NGO. At that time, it was called Prince of Wales Business Leaders Forum, so set up by now King Charles. That was an amazing experience because we worked together with companies that were members of the Business Leaders Forum. And it wasn't just monetary contributions. We got to work with people from those companies. So one of the projects that I did was with a representative from Adidas and Nike. And we physically went into shoe factories to enhance the working conditions. So it had nothing to do with working as a lawyer or consultant. It was facilitating that. And that was a tremendous lesson that it shapes you. It's developing skills, developing respect, cultural understanding that I would never have had would I have stayed in the Netherlands.
Nice. That's like I already have 10 points that I'm not going to summarize because it's just too much for me to manage right now. So thank you, Anne. I want to just go back, but before I go back, I just want to say hello to Hi Subramaniam Iyer. Thank you for coming in. And yes, I'm happy that you are with us too. And Andreas, thank you for joining us. All right, he is our latest addition for the Flow Profiler Assure. So that's Andreas. Yeah. Now, as we move on, what caught my attention when you did the first part of the introduction is really, I felt that you were a little bit controversial in the sense that you choose to become a lawyer and then you don't want to fight.
Mm-hmm.
You say you rather build than fight. I liked it because I would think that people who want to be a lawyer must be ready for a good fight, right? So, and what I also loved is that, how you're finding your clarity as to, what you want. And sometimes when you're not sure about what you want, at least figure out what you don't want and get it out of the way. So I loved those two things. But there was one part where you actually say commercial aspect comes first before the legal aspect. I think a lot of us who are very passionate about something or in the field that we are specializing, like for me, it would be emotions, right? Mm-hmm. And I can relate to it. So for different people, it would be different passion that we are holding on to. And when we are in a business space, naturally, I think this is either said or not said, but we know that commercial aspect always precedes everything else, said or unsaid. So how did you then navigate your way with not fighting but building?
A lot of the building happened because it was about growing the business. So you work on acquisitions. So you do so initially it was about someone else would identify the target companies, and then my role would be to negotiate the contract. And so there you look at win-win situations, right? So because you're acquiring a company, so you have to continue together. So it's it is that aspect where you build, and I think it's for a lot of people who work in a law firm and don't do they don't very often have to go to court. It's like it's depending on the practice that you're in. But for me, it was the couple of times that I had to go to court. It's disturbing. So doing the work in terms of establishing companies, we had a huge R&D program. So we set up separate companies, invested in there, and that is how you grow the business. So that's a lot more of the building and growing a company. Listing a company was, because you don't have to fight. I mean, you negotiate with the banks, and of course there were large teams involved, but it's for a win-win situation. So that's more where I'm coming from than trying to solve a problem with employee. And that's why one of the reasons I had to go to court is because employee, if it would be a conflict around employees, they would still allow you not to you didn't have to be working for a law firm to do that. But yeah, it's just not fun. And negotiation could be tough as well. So don't get me wrong. So
yeah. I'm coming to that. I just want to address, hi, Anima. Yeah, Anima Kosa is on our show. So thank you, Anne, for bringing Anima into our show. And she's saying there's a lot of us lawyers who choose not to fight. Now, I just want to make sure I've understood your identification with fight. So, I just want to make sure I've got it right. So what I'm hearing is that fight seemed to mean a win or lose. But whatever you call it, whether you call it negotiation, right, or collaboration, or whatever you call the conversation, your intention seems to be a win-win, right? Yes, so I think it's correct. More than labeling what it is. It seems to me you bring in your value of respect into the space by equalizing the power and say, let's see how both of us can get what we want. Is what I am hearing. Did I get that part right?
Yes, you did. And it is indeed about how can we go forward together, both benefit from it. And it's not that every court case is not ending up in where both parties get something. As I mentioned, during my study, I was working together with a children's judge. And you do see a lot of conflict there. It's like divorces where you had to look at what is going to happen with the children. So if I say fight, and that's the sort of fights that you saw. And so one of the companies that, I was still working in the Netherlands. So one of the companies that we invested in went bankrupt. And so we ended up in court, and it was one of these really nasty fights. It was a well-known lawyer who was against us, and it's a nasty fight. So that's how I associate fighting versus building and investing.
Hi, Ashok is staring at me, but I have one more burning question because I think it's lovely that you found a way to manage conflict, stay on track with win-win, because I think that's really ideal, right? But if you think about, I'm sure there was a transitional journey where you're figuring out, how do I get out of fight mode when the situation requires me, while you're preparing and taking control, to moving into the skills, the kind of skills you learn to maybe choose to be in situations where it's a win-win, right? And there would be a transition, right? And during this transition, you would have learned skills that helps you be the person you want to be, going for a win-win. Right? Because you seem to be choosing the win-win along the way. And there would be, so what are some skills? So for people who are listening and who are connecting with Anne, and you're saying, yeah, I also don't want to fight. But what are some skills that would help me get there as a leader, or even in personal leadership? What are some skills that you think is essential, that you learned along the way that help you to make those choices more consistent?
Yeah, so I think one of the aspects that I mentioned earlier is to be very clear on what the parties want. Is if you make assumptions on, oh yeah, this company wants to be acquired, and they will continue. Is that you really need to, in order to prevent conflicts along the line, is that listening skill, and don't make assumptions on what companies want. So I think that is so critical. This is like one of the best contracts are never opened again. They're signed and they disappear, and there's no conflicts. So understanding that, and my personal journey was eventually to not be a lawyer anymore. So that is a reschooling of becoming more of a strategy consultant, and moving out of legislation. Doesn't mean that there are no conflicts. I mean, every job has conflicts, and so it's being able to navigate, respect other people's view, and try to find common solutions. And so I think I started off by sort of being pushy, judgmental, and don't be that, because you will get much more into conflicts than when you show respect. Still share your own points of view, see how you can get out of situations rather than just going for a fight. So, but that's a really very personal approach, and I think we're snowflakes, right? So every person is really different. So what works for me wouldn't work for someone else, because one of the things that I've learned very well along the way is that everyone has their own way of communicating. Is some people are very pushy, very direct. Others are creative, want to sort of come up with new ideas all the time. And then I also worked with a lot of people who need to have that confidence. It's like, this has been proven. I can only work with ideas that have been proven, and come up with 50-page proof that this is going to work. So along the journey, you learn how to work with different people. You communicate in different ways. If someone is a driver and wants to have 2 pointers, and you get two minutes to get your point across, it's a very different way of working. So I think understanding that that different people, different methods of working. So I think that's important as well.
Right.
Nice, nice. I mean, it's so interesting that I know I should you're dying with the question, but I'll just say this. I want to really appreciate you, just the way Anima Kosai is actually saying it. She says, sounds like my journey to and from pushy, judgmental origin story, right? And I think what resonates a lot with me, because you have said it twice. I love the way you said how you identified being judgmental and navigating your way to first navigate, knowing that you need to figure out a way. And you listen with a lot of respect, trying to bring everybody and equalize the space for each other. And I saw you repeating that twice, to where you were to where you are. And you demonstrated again by reminding us how we are like snowflakes, for each, every one of us will need to figure out what defines us and what makes us feel like us, and figure out what works for us. And again, that's demonstrating respect and listening to say that, yeah, this worked for me, but not necessarily it works for you. Thank you very much. Okay, Ashok.
Thank you. Yes, so Anima, I think I'm going to reach out to you on LinkedIn. Maybe I should get you on the show. We should hear your stories too. So, Anne, I'm going to take 2 steps back. Thank you, Mallory, for putting in context Anne's transitional journey as a leader and how she has evolved. I want to take 2 steps back to something you mentioned earlier, where you said when you first came to Asia, you had to have a deep level of self-awareness, a lot of deep questions you started asking yourself. You said, who am I? You had to reflect a lot. And you talked about being in the shoe factory. Can I call it factory? Okay. It was the shoe factory, Adidas and Nike. And that's where there was a lot of reflection of your soul, if I can, pun intended. All right. So tell us a little bit more about what were your deep learnings there about yourself? Because you said these are lessons that you could have never learned if you were in Netherlands. What touched, moved, and inspired you at a personal level when you were there on that floor? And how did that help you become the powerful Anne that you are today?
Thank you. So I grew up in a world where there was no shortage of anything. As the software company, by the time we listed, everyone had shares in the company. I think we made 100 people millionaires overnight. So there wasn't any shortage. And then you go to Vietnam, and you do see real poverty. And you do see people that are working in horrible circumstances, where it's young people, young women who are sniffing glue because they're sitting on top of really poisonous glue. And these are really young people. They are away from their families. I would never have experienced anything like that in a developed country where I didn't even see factories, and if I did, then it was all beautifully organized. And so it's the poverty, the working conditions is it's giving you a completely different view on where a country is going through. So those were one of the other things is where people are saying, oh, child labor, it's so bad. And it's like, yeah, it is bad. It is really bad. But if you get the choice of working for a company where you have a shelter, or you're poor and you're sent on the street to become a prostitute. So look, how can you sit comfortably in your house in Europe and say, oh, it's so bad? It's like you have no clue until you really see it and experience it yourself and speak to these people. So again, and I do try to go back on a really regular basis to basis and just understand what people's living conditions are. And that has really changed my entire attitude and view on life.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is empathy, a deep level of empathy, right? And from what you were saying earlier, because the Anne we have heard so far likes to build, and she has deep level of empathy, and it seems to be driven from a lot of values that you hold.
Thank you. I think that's thanks to my parents who put yes. We grew up in a family where values were extremely important. So yeah, I think it's. But as I said, you're surrounded by luxury, and it is something that if you don't live in other countries, that you just take things for granted. And so yeah, and experiencing living in places like New Delhi, that also was another eye opener, right? Very different than the places I had lived just before that, because it was Hong Kong and then Shanghai and then New Delhi. So again, you see so much poverty.
Different parts.
Yeah.
Wow. I like the example you gave, because it's true. A lot of us just sit on our ivory chairs or ivory towers, right? And go on like, oh, child labor is wrong. But, you on the ground, you said, you know what? There's a choice. I mean, which is worse? Do I be a prostitute, or if I'm a child working in a factory, I've got a roof over my head, if I got food on the table. Those are tough choices. And that had definitely shifted the way you look at humanity, you look at businesses, you look at the world. Now, how has that helped you in the way you design solutions for organizations in Asia when you became a consultant in Asia?
Right. That was another real lesson learned when I moved to Asia. Is a contract is a contract. It's like when it's signed, it's like that's it, and you live by it. Not the case in Asia, and I think it also had to do with the state of where a Vietnamese economy was in. It was opening up, but one of the things is like what we agreed is it's like, Anne, you have to understand one thing. It's a talking point. We can always go back and forth. Once you sign it and things change, we will change. And so it was really hard for me to grasp. We talked about it for months, and we agreed, we all signed it, and then you're breaking it up as if it's the most normal thing in the world. So that was such a big shift, and demanding to be flexible and to not be in my own rigid mind but it's impossible. It's like, how can they do this? So I started to refer to it as Vietnamese Tangle. Sometimes you take 3 steps forward and 2 back. Sometimes it's the other way around. So it's helping you to think flexible, taking more time, be more respectful, and also take into consideration how you could work with. So the example of the shoe factories is what we were trying to do is very gentle, not to criticize people, but to gently recommend that children would get education, so that part of the hours that they were working were not in the factory, but were towards education. So it's like trying to deal with things like that. But yeah, I think I just learned how to be more respectful for and not always easy, because it's like when people when I would say, oh, but I've changed so much, and then it's like, no, you're just still very driven and ambitious, and so even though when other people reflect on you, it's like, no, you're still pretty driven and outspoken. So
I like that. I have learned a new term now: Vietnamese Tangle.
Nice. Thank you. I think over and over again, respect, compassion, empathy is probably the themes that makes you really so strongly special. Anima Kosai has a question for you. It's a long question. Now she asks, curious as to how serious Asian companies are addressing working conditions and sustainability with the increasing supply chain regulations in Europe? And there's a second question, whether the European companies are partnering with Asian suppliers in a supportive way rather than simply terminating violating suppliers.
Yeah. Asian companies have to be, so to address the first part, they have to be serious because it's going to limit the opportunities to be working with European companies, right? I have seen that companies are helping. They're not just ditching, they are helping to go through this and see how they can continue to collaborate rather than just ditching them. So this is definitely not the case for every company. But even when I was working in Vietnam, late 90s, early 2000, we were already doing audits and see how you could help companies to be much more compliant. So this has been, for some companies, already a really long journey. But those are the crown jewels, right? And I'm pretty sure that there will be companies who couldn't care less and are just ditching Asian suppliers. But I've seen really good examples along the way.
Thank you. I hope, Anima, that you're happy with that. And thank you for saying yes to our show. She said yes earlier. So, okay, so I know you've always been on a building phase, right? And you're excited about your next phase that you're building. Tell us about how you kept yourself busy during COVID and how that has helped you now transition to your next phase.
Yes, yeah. So my last job was my last salary job was with Ernst and Young, and I was traveling like crazy. I was in Houston every other 6 weeks, and then I would go back via London or via the Middle East. So lots of travel. I arrived back in Singapore, I think 24 hours before the borders were closed. So I was super lucky. And I ended up sitting together in the house with my husband. And I had, so we had sometimes, we didn't see each other for months because he was traveling, I was traveling. And there you are, COVID hit. And we're in the same office working behind a computer screen. What we said to each other is, because it's like you had unhealthy lunches, dinners, is let's not fall in the trap of eating more, drinking more. Let's start with a really healthy regime, and that's what we did. So we were actually very active. You could run, eat healthy. And initially, my colleagues around the world were really supportive on, oh yeah, and you're 14 hours ahead. So let's reschedule calls in the morning and you do them in the evening. It ended up just me sitting behind the computer screen in the middle of the night. And so it wasn't fun anymore. And you also know that you've proven that you can work from a computer screen, that you don't have to see people in person. And I'm probably old-fashioned, but I still like to work with people and have the physical contact rather than just behind a screen. So when my contract came up for, it was basically, I had a contract with a Hong Kong firm, reached their retirement age, and that we looked at, okay, so shall we renew? And I don't want to. It's like I'm not enjoying it anymore. I was still very passionate about the work, but it's like the conditions around it were just not nice. And the sort of the thought of me not working scared me. So I did speak to a couple of headhunters, and it's like, what can I do in Singapore? And they said, just take a break for a couple of months and see what you really like. So I've always had a passion for cooking. And by the time I stopped working, I was already 100% plant-based. I didn't eat any fish or meat or dairy products anymore. And it's like, I just need to know more about how I can make plant-based food more tasty. So, and that's how I turned a hobby into a full-time focus. I did online courses first, and when I got the opportunity last year, I reschooled myself, went to Le Cordon Bleu in London, back to school for 3 months in a very disciplined kitchen, an environment that I was not familiar with at all. It's like you cook from home, it's easy. But this was like in 2 hours, 3 hours, you have to present this, you do this many dishes. So that discipline and working with professional chefs in a professional kitchen. So that's how COVID changed my life. It's from being full-time, sort of the COO of the oil and gas sector in EY across all the different functions, to now being well, I called it maître de cuisine, because even though I went to probably one of the best culinary schools, it's like you still have to learn. So I don't call myself a chef. I was working on my website, and one of my friends reviewed it and said, "You have to call yourself a chef." And it's like, that's pretentious. I went to school, but it's like I can't call myself a chef yet. Maybe at some stage, but not now. So
Nice.
Yeah.
Actually, Anima is thanking you for your answer. She says, "Thank you. That's very hopeful to hear." But you know what, Ashok, what's my big takeaway before I pass it on to you for the close is that I've heard Anne say that every time she makes a transition, she's talking about reschooling herself.
Yeah.
And
Always.
that's something, yeah. So I like the way you use the word reschool, right? Go back to school and figure it out again. And it's okay to do that. And if you want to do that, reschool so that you school yourself properly. So I think if there's like for me one magic word, leaders of change, how do we plan transitional journeys? Reschool, reschool,
Reschool.
all right. So thank you, Anne. And Ashok, I'm going to give you the privilege to ask any last question before.
Sure. No, thank you very much, and it's been really nice listening to your story. And I do agree about the reschooling. So you have seen how Anne has transited from being a lawyer to being a strategic consultant, and now heading towards running your own business about plant-based food and being a chef in that sense, right? And knowing you, the way you bring the values again about how you listen, how you want to create a win-win, and where you want to build. What's your one advice you can have for your listeners here about plant-based food? How can you help them build?
Well, think about. So there has been so many studies that demonstrate that plant-based food is healthier for yourself. So it's like, think about your well-being in the workplace. Is like having more plant-rich food. I mean, I quite radically changed, but that may be very hard for people. But every plant-rich meal that you can have is contributing to your own health. And I've been reading this book by Dr. Gregor's How Not to Die, and it explains on the first page how his grandma was sent home from hospital basically to die. She was in her 60s, had a serious heart condition, and she lived until her 90s because she changed to a plant-based diet. So that's just one example. And there are so many of these examples. So it's healthier for yourself. It's clearly a lot healthier for the planet to not have the CO2 from particularly red meat. So think about the animal cruelty, the animal agricultural cruelty. And it's something that we don't really look at, but it's like it's a fact, right? So for anyone, every plant-rich meal is better for everyone.
All right. Thank you very much again, Anne, for sharing that with us. And an interesting book. I think I've come across that book, but I have not read it. It's been recommended before, How Not to Die.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, thank you very much for all your valuable lessons, Anne. It's been really enlightening for all of us. And I like the way you do your Vietnamese tango, how you made the legal practice sounds so interesting, and how you're always focusing on building, 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 and while you are reschooling, reschooling, and reschooling. So thank you very much for that, Anne.
Thank you
Yes.
for having me.
Oh, it's lovely, lovely. I mean, thank you for showing us how not to fight, but to build with loads
That's
of respect, empathy, and compassion that you have over and over again shown through this conversation. Thank you, and wishing you all the best in converting more people for a sustainable world. Right, and yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. So
Bye.
as we say bye to Anne, and wow, Ashok, that was the last part was a little bit difficult for me to swallow because I was thinking about the non-plant stuff I'm eating. So I think, and
The what?
yeah, when she spoke about sustainability and animal cruelty, I'm trying to
Right.
look away. I'm thinking
But I
that
like the
was
way you said how not to fight, and I think that's true. That's Anne's show today.
yeah,
How not to fight
brilliant.
and build. You know, build win-win.
Mm, mm, mm.
I like that.
And I
Thank
think
you very much for
she,
developing.
she demonstrated it consistently that it's just not
Exactly.
talk, but I won't even use the word walk the talk. I think she internalizes this and
That's right.
you can
That's
see
right.
it being
Yeah.
over and over again. So fantastic, Ashok. I certainly learned a lot in a very calming way after a very, very busy day. And I think as we end the show, we want to thank the audience who were silently joining us on LinkedIn, the
Yes.
ones who also chose to articulate and ask questions, and of course who not only commented and engaged with us, but who has said yes to our next program or our program in the
Yes.
future. Yeah, and Subramania, Iyer, thank you for joining us too, and all the other people who are, in the background talking to us. So
Right.
with that, I think we are happy to say good night and
Bye.
bye
See you
from
all next
Malaysia.
week.
See you
And
all
from
next week.
Singapore, see you all
Yeah,
next week.
see you next
Thank you.
week with another guest, right? No,
No,
next week we're doing
just you and I.
summary. Yeah, next week will be just me and Ashok trying to summarize our golden nuggets from the month of March. With that, stay well till we see you again next week. Stay safe. Bye.
Bye.